I'm on United Israel, but
I don't.
hold on.
I don't know how to do it either.
Whirly
I'm the,
circle.
Audio zone.
Audio zone.
Aloha.
My mic's on. We ready then? Okay. Shabbat Shalom and welcome to our dialogue. We are here today. We have a full table. Thanks for everybody who came today. All of you get a gift. You get a calendar. And that way you know what day it is.
I thought we were going to have to look under our chairs for a second.
Yeah, look under your chairs. There's a calendar for you. So, again, welcome all of you who are watching on Facebook or YouTube. Today, we talked a little bit about the plan and how that's passed through the patriarchs. And one family is chosen, the family of Abraham. And that is the whole point. And that the plan is going to be worked out, as Dr. Tabor once said in Restoring Abrahamic Faith. The plan of salvation is to be worked out in the rugged arena of human history, here on earth. And so one of the things that I focused on, for those of you who followed along, hopefully I made this pretty clear, I backed off of my original intention to go through every single verse about the oath. But that's kind of what I want to focus on for the dialogue. But I'm open, for other ideas, either from our internet audience or from the group at the table. But this idea that God has sworn that He's going to fulfill an oath and what that oath consists of. So I open it up to anyone at the table and or online if people want to want to talk about anything in particular. Fire away.
Well, I've often wondered, I know that in the script, and we've covered this ground before, to speak where the Bible speaks and be silent where the Bible is silent.
Yep.
But I've often wondered, as on a side note, Abraham obviously had certain innate qualities, and he lived his life accordingly. But apparently he was not aware, because he lived in a world of idolatry. Somehow I get the impression that that wasn't working for him. And so I've often wondered if that's the case, because it doesn't say, and whether he was actually seeking the creator of heaven and earth, and the Almighty recognized that, plus the way he conducted himself, and chose him for those reasons. I don't know. It just says, I picked him.
Yeah.
Doesn't say why. So it obviously doesn't need to be a why, but.
Inquiring minds want to
Yeah,
know.
Just one of those things in the Bible where you go, I wonder.
Well, that wondering is it's okay. I mean, and it's what led to the rabbinic legends that said that Abraham was from a place of idolatry. We get this from Joshua 24. Joshua 24 says very plainly, you and your fathers dwelt on the other side, and there they served other gods. So there is this idea that in Ur, in Mesopotamia, that there was an idolatrous center, and we know that archaeologically and everything else. But according to the legends, what we would call the midrash, the stories that are based on this wondering that you're talking about, they say, Abraham's father owned an idol shop. He could have.
Oh, yeah.
And most of these midrashim, these stories, they're caused by people wondering, I wonder if, and then Abraham, in other words, why did God pick Abraham? We know ultimately why he favored him and why he chose him to do the task. Why did he pick him in the first place? And it could be, based on what we know of God from the text, this is how they come up with this. God eschews idolatry, and so he sees somebody that isn't an idolater in a world of idolaters, because that's the guy. What we do know is that later in our text, in Genesis 18, for instance, he says, because I know Abraham, and he is going to teach his children and his household after him the way of justice and righteousness. Now, how does God know that? Because God's God. Because he doesn't have kids at the time. But, we have to wonder, how did he treat Lot? What do we know of his character? So, again, there are stories that we speculate, and that can be fun.
Well, one of the things, go ahead.
Bottom line, he did get picked.
He did get picked.
Oh, yeah.
He made
Oh,
the
yeah,
cut.
No question about that.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons that made me think of that is in the scriptures, Jehovah says, you turn toward me, I will turn toward you. So what the question on the table is, or the statement on the table is, you turn towards me, and I will turn towards you.
Yeah.
So that made me think, well, was Abraham actually didn't know who it was, didn't know anything about it, but this isn't working for me, and he's in his mind and in his heart seeking the answers, and because his heart was there, his mind was there, God responded. I'm just saying.
Didn't he get, wasn't Noah still alive around the time of Abraham, even his descendants? So Abraham learned whatever was passed down from Noah?
Well, there is an interesting thing. If you do the math, and we've done this years and years ago, where you look and see who was still alive when this happened, and there could be a continuity that goes all the way back, and so there is that idea. One of the things that strikes me is that, for instance, with Noah, in chapter 6, verse 8 and 9, it says, Noah was a righteous man, tamim in his generation, whole, complete, a righteous man. Ish tzaddik, tamim, flawless is without blemish is the way. When tam is used in association with sacrifices, it means without a blemish. So we do get this idea. Now, Noah is called that. Abraham in Genesis 17 is told, walk before me and be perfect. Remember, Enoch and Noah walked with God. Hit halek calls themselves to be walking with God. So there is this idea that there's a walk and a completion about a person who follow after God's ways. And then we also read in the patriarchal narratives, Isaac, where it says Isaac has twins, Jacob and Esau. Esau's a man of the field. It says Jacob, the translations generally says Jacob is a quiet man. He dwelled in tents. Well, quiet man is not what the Hebrew says. In Hebrew, it says he's a tam, like a complete man, dwelling in tents. This idea of being whole or complete without blemish, it doesn't mean like we would tend to think, oh, you think you're perfect, Stephen. Oh, you're so, because we have this idea that perfection, which is sometimes the way they translate this tamim, who can be perfect? Well, if perfect means what we think perfect means, then we've got several examples of perfect people. But we know they're not perfect like we think about it. There's something else, though. And we're going to get into this over the next few classes, this idea of what does it take. Well, in other words, God doesn't have to use sinless humans. Thank God, right? Or some of y'all wouldn't make it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, well put.
Yeah. Some of y'all, I know some of y'all wouldn't make it.
Well, I know that's the problem with our world. There are a lot of broken people who've lost hope, and they want hope that they could be saved. They could be redeemed. They could be healed. They could be made whole.
Yeah.
They could be made complete.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever.
I'm grabbing something. Take the broken pieces.
Yes. And I think that was what was so attractive in Christianity, is that there was a solution to your brokenness.
Good marketing
In
plan.
Christianity, there was a solution offered.
Well, there is in the Hebrew Bible too.
So that's
Yeah, it has to do though with the walk, and so let's bring this back to the question about Abraham. He's told he's in an idolatrous surrounding, and he's given one command: Lek lecha, walk for yourself. And I have often believed that this walk is what it's about. Faith is not static. Faith is not the repetition of a certain word or a certain confession that is the end all to our salvation experience. I believe that it involves a pursuit, a walking after God and His ways. It doesn't mean that like I don't believe, like if somebody goes, well, are you saved, Ross? I believe that we are being saved, if you will.
It's a process.
It's a process. And I think that there's something.
Next time somebody asks me that, I'm just going to say, no, I'm walking.
I'm walking. I'm on the walk.
I'm walking out
on the
my
walk.
salvation.
Think about that powerful passage in Jeremiah chapter 6. Stand ye in the ways and seek and ask after the ancient paths wherein the good way lies, and walk in it and find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not walk therein. That's the tragedy of it. We humans, like if you have something that you want to tell me, you have a message of the ages, Mark, and you're going to tell me I've got the message of the plan of God, and I believe you, and I say, well, what does it involve? And you go, well, it involves a lifelong dedication, a walking after God and His ways. Then I might say, well, do you have anything a little more sure? Like, what happens if I mess up? You're like, well, you just need to get straight. It's like if you've ever, the other day, I'll give you an example. I was riding with Toby. Toby's got him a car, and I'm trying to get him used to driving places on his own, but I also want to be with him because when he rode with me for years, he never paid attention. He was on his phone or whatever. Well, now he's very good about, he doesn't even, phone's away from him, but he's got his directions on. And I said, I felt like I was riding with Dave. This is Dave. Watch this. I said, Toby, just plug this address in, and she's going to tell you everywhere to turn. And so Siri came on, and she said, turn right. I said, don't turn right, turn left. And he said, well, why did it say turn right? I said, don't worry about that. I happen to know that there's a bridge out. He doesn't know that. So Siri doesn't know that I'm helping Toby. She's trying to help him. So she says, now turn right again. I said, no, turn left again. We're going to turn right at the next thing. So I'm watching his phone. It's rerouting. So we get to the next turn, and I tell it, and finally,
It catches up.
it catches up to me, and we're on the right path. And I told him later about the bridge being out. I said, she didn't know about the bridge being out. I happen to know it's been out for 5 years, thank you to the Louisiana road repair system that we live in. Well, life can be like that sometimes. You know, there are certain times where we make the wrong turn. And what we have to be is we have to catch up. We have to correct, sort of auto-correct and get back on that path. Though the righteous fall 7 times, you know, it's not like you just mess up and that's it. You know, you can make reparation. You can turn back to God. That's the beauty of this. And what I really love about the patriarchal narratives is that they're not perfect in our definition of perfect, and God uses them.
Basically, this whole idea of being perfect or you know, as we tend to see it in our humanity, you know, perfect. There's no perfect people around. But that idea is what led to the replacement theology, that Israel wasn't perfect. You know, they messed up and so on and so forth. So you got to really get rid of that idea, that Western idea of being perfect.
Yeah.
Because basically God said this is the way it's going to be done, and that's what's happened. If you look at humanity down through the ages, up till this very present, you know, that was the chosen deal, the path. That was the path that made. So there wasn't any deviation of that, replacement, and
the plan didn't change.
It's about dynamics. I mean, I get the feeling that a lot of people that don't read the scriptures and keep an eye out for certain things, certain little clues, kind of treat God as an intellectual statue.
Yeah.
In other words, when I started reading scripture a few years back, there were things that I found that was like, wow, I didn't realize that. In other words, God has a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Abraham laughed at him. God laughed at him. They were old. He said, you're going to have a baby. They thought it was hilarious. And he said, okay, and you're going to have a child, and you're going to call him Laugh.
Yeah.
Try that one on for time.
Right.
So, and then he gets mad, right, at the bad behavior of his chosen people. And he tells Moses, I'm just going to wipe them all out and start over with you. Now, sense of humor, anger, you know, start filling in the blanks. If we're in the image and likeness of him, he's given us those abilities, those characteristics. Probably not to the I'm sure. I believe not to the elevation he has, but he's got all those things that we have. That's that likeness, that image. And so, you know, when you start looking at it, it's God's not this fixed thing. We have there's no, and that's what drives a lot of people. Well, there's no forgiveness, you know. And this other theology says all you got to do is say sign on, and I've got it all. You don't have any problems. Get out of jail free card. Yeah, man can't do it. And in the scripture, God says, no. You make a mistake, turn to me. I turn to you. You're sincere. I forgive. And we'll move on.
If you're on the right path, you still got to do it.
And you keep on going.
Yeah, it's always a walk, and you know, it's beautiful. Like if you look at, say, Ezekiel 18, makes a very, very strong point. Like let's work through the scenarios, because people had begun to think, well, there's no way I can do this. You know, I mean, it's beyond me. My father was a bad person, and you know, I've inherited everything from him, and it's hopeless. And so what Ezekiel wants to set the record straight. One of the most powerful instructions that we can read is this Ezekiel 18, because it's clearly saying, look, if it doesn't have anything to do with that. If you do what's right, and you seek to follow God's way, you're okay. Now, you need to keep doing that. Now, if you mess up, you need to get back and get on the right path. I think we tend to think that it's a one-time event. Now, don't get me wrong. many of us have experienced, Sherry brings her personal testimony up often, where something happened on such and such date, and people have described it variously. I was saved, I was born again, the Spirit of God hit me, I was, and people can laugh and scoff at that, but most people that I know had that experience some way, and they felt, and to this day, many, I do, feel that was real.
Yeah.
That was sincere. That turning event, but that turning event and the sincerity of my decision to follow after God, I've had ups and downs. Look, I mean, I've made mistakes. I've fallen away. I've drifted from the path. But over time, I try to correct. I'm always trying to correct.
Yes.
How do I be a better me? And people go, oh, it's not about you. Well, it is about it. We have been tasked with, because God says, if you look at Isaiah 51, which I mentioned this morning, you who chase after God, you who seek Jehovah, chase after righteousness, seek Jehovah. That group in Isaiah 51 is defined as a group in whose heart is my Torah. So if we have the Torah written on our hearts, as we read the text and internalize God's Word, we're always trying to correct our bad behavior and adopt the righteousnesses of God, so to speak.
It's not a passive thing. It's active.
That's right.
That's right.
That's
You
right.
can't just, put it to bed and just hope for the best.
So this series you're doing, this is the second or third?
Third.
This is the third?
Mhm.
Can you briefly just kind of give me,
Yeah, the
I'm
first.
trying to remember what you taught last week and the week before last.
Yeah,
Just real quickly,
the first one was just sort of an overview to kind of whet the appetite, if you will. The second one, I talked a little bit about the patriarchs and the name of Israel. And the second one, I talked about Abraham's seed and how that was so vital to this plan, is that God chose a certain man and his seed. Today's class was sort of to underscore that and underline it and bold type it and italicize it and say, look, this is not only just words on the page, this is an oath from Jehovah. God says, I swore by myself. And so that way, if anybody says, well, yeah, I mean, he did use Israel in the Old Testament, but they failed. In fact, what I like to point out to my Christian friends, which I do have some Christian friends, I'll tell them, even in the Christian writings, this idea that Israel is not fallen, so have they been replaced? You think about, it says very clearly in the book of Romans, right? See, I still remember this, that this people was selected to bring about the plan. So anyway, that's important to know. God didn't, like Dave said a minute ago, God didn't say, oh, well, I tried it and the Israelis messed it up.
Go
And
Plan B.
who am I going to pick now?
Well, and to a point, 100 years ago, even less, the conversation would have held less weight might have held less weight, factual weight anyway, of the promise than it does today after 1947. You see, Israel is reestablished as a land.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
God
before.
didn't forget his promise. I mean, he was just mad at things, dispersed them throughout. There has to be, I guess, an atonement there.
There is, and you're right, before the modern Jewish state before the movement of Zionism, let's say, the 1800s, now there have always been Jewish people living in the land from eternity past, and the majority, if we look at census data, but the idea of large-scale coming back to the land, which we'll get into these prophecies, before that, a lot of people said, well, they were interpreting a lot of key biblical, mainly in evangelical circles, Christian Protestants, they began to allegorize the land, like the return to the land, all these eschatological themes. They began to tie Beulah land is heaven. Think of the old hymn, right? This idea of going to Beulah land. Well, they didn't think of that as going to the land of Israel. They thought about that as going to streets of gold and walking in heaven and so forth.
They could pretty much, before 1948, the world had pretty much decided that the replacement theology was maybe, possible, because look, we don't have a land anymore. There's no Jewish nation to call home and so forth. Until that happened, when that happened, that kind of changed things. I like to look at it like he was chosen, Abraham was chosen, and then there was a task given to him, and then throughout thousands of years, the seed, it got to this point right now where we're at, the nations of the world basically have to decide what they want to do. In other words, they can take that information and now it's up to them what they want to do. There's less emphasis on the chosen person rather than the plan and what the other people, the whole point of the whole plan was, that all nations would be blessed.
We have to get the idea of the plan in order to move forward, and it involves more than just one. So I see J.J. Walters brings up a point, and quite a few of the comments that I've seen him post are asking the question about the singular seed. Who is this seed? Doesn't this promise look forward? What's that? Is that a phone? You hear that? Is it? Anyway, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. But anyway, the idea is that God will bring everything to fulfillment through a particular person, a seed, if you will, which is generally interpreted as the seed of David, the messianic ruler that's to rise up. Think of all the passages in Jeremiah and Micah chapter 5, and who is this ruler? This study, I will get back into that. I have taught in the past on this, but I'm also going to bring that part in, because when we start dealing with the tribes, we have to address the, let's call it, messiahs. I'm going to use the plural for very good reason. We have to get into this as part of the return of Israel. Remember Jeremiah 4:2, if you return, im tashuv, if you return, Israel, return unto me. Now, in the meantime, history has had plenty of people, claimants, as that key figure. Like a lot of people go, wait a minute, but Ross, you obviously don't know the Bible, because this clearly says this. People will be very surprised, I think, as we work through some of those texts. We do need to work through them. And I'm looking forward to people like JJ, who's obviously studied this, being part of that discussion, because there are things that we're all going to learn together. But I think it's very important, first of all, Christianity, let's just say this, Christianity has made the seed of Abraham always and only about one particular figure, and that's the Messiah. In fact, the promises in the patriarchal promises, the Apostle Paul uses to say, and that seed was Christ, meaning everything that was promised talked about this one figure. That's it. Whereas Jehovah, to make sure there's no confusion, he said, listen, so that you're not confused about the seed that I'm talking about that's going to get this blessing and all, come out here and look at the stars. And he makes this point that if you can count these, that's what I'm talking about.
So in Christianity, when Paul makes the point about that one seed being Jesus, doesn't he also go on to say that if you are in Christ Jesus, you are also his seed, the children of Abraham? I mean, that's where I could see it would get confusing.
That's the confusing part.
The whole of Christendom, if you're in Christ, you're that whole bunch of seeds.
So for any of my critics that think I don't remember Paul, Galatians 3:16 says that this idea that the seed is talking about Christ. Galatians 3:28 and 29 says, "And if you belong to Christ, ye are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise."
So that's
So
where
there's
the
this
replacement-
idea that we're going to get into. I told people
Okay.
at the outset of of this series, we will ultimately, should God allow, get to those texts because they are very important. Look, there are people along this walk in different places, and there are some who don't want anything to do with any of those texts. But these are important questions that have to be answered for people to have a full understanding of what happened and
Yeah.
what is yet to
And for
happen.
people wrestling that
Yeah.
are coming to the knowledge of the truth.
Yeah. So we're going to look at some of those things, and I think it's important that we do. I know for me, I grew up in the Christian traditions, and what I've always said, I've told people, a lot of people are very negative towards where they came from. For me, I cherish my upbringing in a biblical home, in a home that taught me to love God, to love Israel, to love the Bible. I learned key concepts such as repentance and forgiveness and salvation and redemption and atonement and all these things. My love for the Bible was planted in those early days and continues to grow to this day. So I'm not negative.
Yeah.
A lot of people get mad and upset and negative, and I say, no, because think about it. There are things that we're going to cover that I think are still very important, and I think they have to be talked about.
It's easy because I can remember coming into religion, so to speak, and looking at the replacement doctrines and going, we're talking 4,000 or 5,000 years down the road. They've had their chance. And, hey, we're going to do it. We're going to do it this time. So it's an easy trap to fall into.
Yeah.
You don't really look at the plan. You don't look at what the purpose of the whole deal is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get the big picture.
And
Big picture.
then too, growing up, being taught, the Holy Land, it's not a land over there. It's wherever God is, or something
Right.
malarkey like
He's
that, not
everywhere,
based
so
on.
But
Scripture.
Like I say, when 48 hit and
Yeah.
became a nation, that kind of changed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people did a double
Drastically.
take.
Like, whoa.
Yeah, well, maybe
Something
this.
happened that people said could never happen.
Right.
It happened.
Yeah, and then once the Jews begin to return, it's interesting. I brought this up, but in the Israeli Declaration of Independence, it says that the land of Israel will be open to Jewish immigration and the ingathering of the exiles. It distinguishes between the two. Now, at the present, people lump those together, and they say, well, yeah, I mean, Jews, ingathering of the exiles are from, but actually, as we get into this study, you're going to see those are distinct and should be distinct, and I think...
And the way I look at it now is like, that was phenomenal. I wasn't alive, of course, when that happened, but, I was young. When I was young, it was still fresh.
Yeah.
So I remember people talking about that. But the point I like to make is that having seen from now, looking back, I'm going, well, aren't we at a stage where it's really the nations of the earth, of the world? Isn't it to a point where they have to choose and they have to look and they have to do something at this point? I want to say that Israel has done their job, is doing their job, has done it, so to speak. The whole world's kind of like, should be looking at it going, well, make a decision, yes or no.
I had an interesting conversation yesterday. John was in the office with me when this call came in, and this particular rabbi and I had a lengthy discussion. And among other things, what we talked about was this idea of a mission-oriented people, and how Christianity has this idea of evangelizing. Like going out and reaching the ends of the earth with a message, and we're going to save, we're going to bring salvation. Judaism, because of the way history played out, let's just say that, because of oppression and pogroms and bad things happened when Jews spoke up. They weren't comfortable with sharing any message with anybody, and they basically came to the point, and I'm speaking generally, not, there are individuals, right, but generally they came to the point where they said, look, you guys don't try to convert me, I'm not going to try to convert you. And the general position of Judaism became, just as Abraham sat in the tent in the heat of the day and waited when the visitors showed up, he serviced them. But didn't go out looking for converts, right? So that what evangelism is a bad word to Judaism. But what if that is actually part of the mission? Now I'm gonna grab a book. It won't take me long because I have it out. One second. Well, they can still hear me.
Yeah,
I could
book
talk
out.
all the way in my office.
That's surprised. Shocked.
Okay. So this book is published in 1965. It's called Conversion to Judaism: A History and Analysis. And Eichhorn is the general editor, and what he was studying was various forms of Judaism, if you will, at the time of his writing and how they viewed things, and he entertains all sorts of things. One thing is very interesting. In 1965, in his book, he talks about a very interesting Jewish organization that's very active at the time. And he calls this group a Jewish Missionary Society. Now get this. And it was established in 1944. And this particular Jewish missionary organization made it a point to go out and evangelize the world with an interesting message. Now here's the message. You ready? To be true to the spirit of our religion, true to the mission of Israel, which he received at Sinai, we must take practical, energetic measures to reclaim first the children of the household, to Judaize the Jews, and through them, directly and indirectly, draw within the sphere of our religious influence those of the non-Jewish population who hunger for truth and righteousness. In a word, we must enter upon a course of active propaganda, or for lack of a better expression, do missionary work within and without Judaism. Judaism is by its very nature a missionary religion, a social force, an ethical movement. He's talking about a group called United Israel World Union, founded by David Horowitz.
Yeah.
This organization, United Israel World Union, saw itself then, and I see it now, as an active in propaganda, reaching out to the world with an evangelical message. Now, the evangelical, think about it, that word means to bring good news. And it's a message that bases its sole existence on the Decalogue faith. How do we spread the Decalogue faith? And that among the nations scattered, having lost their identity, are untold numbers of actual physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they're coming back. Now that's interesting to me. And so what do we do? Your point, your question, Dave, you were talking about Israel's done its job to a certain degree, and then now the nations of the world. That's the order it says. You get Israel together, it's United Israel, and then World Union comes later.
Yeah,
Well-
the nations have to decide.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that Israel's got it all together.
No, I got you.
You know, they've come together now, but no, in a sense they have. They've actually
To
gone
some
through
degree.
the process.
To some degree, and to some degree,
But there is, I don't know if the text says there
Are
has
you-
to be a degree there.
Are
oh,
you
there
talk-
definitely does, because
you-
we don't even have identified who the others are
Right,
yet. That's my
because-
point.
Are you referring to Judah?
Yeah, he is.
Judaism. Judah, it sounds like you're referring to Judaism. They've
I'm
gone to
just saying,
Israel
you know.
and they're doing it.
When it's
That's not
all
all of
together, let me
Israel.
make this point. When it's all together,
Yeah.
you won't need a teacher. We won't need
Right,
anybody
yeah.
to teach it. We're not there yet. So ultimately, in the new covenant, when the house of Israel and the house of Judah, you know, when they come together. Right now, the interesting thing is,
It doesn't say though, they've all been taught. They won't need a new teacher because they've all been taught. It's just because they'll know.
well, yeah, but yeah, there is a text too that adds
says
to
they
that.
won't need a teacher.
But the idea though is it is and it isn't. It's partially fulfilled, where we can look at the modern Jewish state and say, "Yep, that's it." But we can also look around and say, it's like, imagine if we had, you have a Thanksgiving dinner with your family. And, you know, you sit down and mama and daddy are there. And you've got, let's say you have 6 kids like me. And the 4 boys are there, but the 2 girls aren't there. Everybody at the table would be like, man, it's just not the same. We're going to have a good meal. We're going to have a good time. But everybody's not at the table yet. The vision of the prophets is that right now there is a dinner going on. And some of the family's there at the table. But everybody's not there yet. And that's the image, is how do we get, where are they? That's what the prophets say. That's the important thing that we have to build up to. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the 12 tribes, what ultimately happens to that group as a result of disobedience and scattering and losing its identity. But we have clues in the text which tell us some very important things, and that's what we're going to look at. So, but yes, it is and it isn't,
Right.
and that's the key.
We were having a conversation about that movie and how some Orthodox Jewish people believe that Zionism is wrong because it's a man-made thing and there needs to be a Messiah that comes to create the state of Israel, not man.
Mm-hmm.
But could it be that there's just a misunderstanding there, that they're not getting the whole picture, that when the 10 lost tribes awaken and start doing what they're supposed to do, that is what will bring, if you want to call it the Messiah, the spirit of Messiah. It may not be just one person. It could be the people.
One of the things that, to get into that, one of the things that I think about is, if you lived at the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, there were people among those that returned that well, there were some, you pointed out they didn't come back. Not all of them came. But those that came back, there were some that said, this isn't a real deal, you know? I mean, when the real one happens, but everything was in place. You had a seed of David right there. You had a priest. You had a key. You had all the pieces were in place, and some were like, I want fireworks, right? I mean, this is, you know, I don't even recognize this Jewish state you got going on here, Ezra and Nehemiah. This isn't, I mean, you got secular people, you know.
Yeah.
How religious is Zerubbabel? Does he fit you know? What about Yeshua, this priest that you got here in Zechariah? I mean, is he really the guy? I mean, I'm waiting on a horse from heaven kind of thing. So people get into this eschatology, and they begin to think it's got to happen the way I've envisioned it. And if it doesn't, I know people who are basically just kind of going to sit on their hands and let the Messiah fix it all. And they think that every text points to the Messiah. And I'm not just talking about Christians, but people do this. Look, the Talmud says in Sanhedrin 98 that everything the prophets said was about the Messiah.
Yeah.
They were doing the
Yeah.
same thing. It's where's Waldo? You know, where I found it. Oh, here it is, here it is, here it is.
So it's like confirmation bias in a different way.
Yeah, and see, some of these texts are not quite as plain and simple as people have tried to make them. And I'm not just trying to muddy the water. I'm looking at the complexities.
Yeah.
I saw Aaron made a comment a few minutes ago. Could the said Christ, that when we were talking about this text in Galatians, could it be plural? And the answer is yes.
That's
I
what
mean,
I'm saying.
there
the Messiah,
are
the
now
anointed.
The word Christ, what's it mean?
there are other texts which clearly seem to indicate a singular figure. Some texts indicate multiple figures, but we'll get into that.
Everybody wants somebody else to come along and fix their problem. That's
Yeah.
It all comes down to that.
Mhm.
You know, where clearly the text says not. got to
Well,
fix
wasn't,
it.
Yeah. Roll up your
wasn't
sleeves.
Roll up
Moses
sleeves.
of a kind of Messiah?
Moses?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was a deliverer.
Sure.
And so, those people are gonna be there, but the first coming, right, was when God appeared to the people of Israel at the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And actually spoke. And the first thing he said was, I'm a jealous God.
How
You
far
will
you
put
wanna
no
go back?"
gods before me. So if you select some Messiah and elevate him to a position, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And so the next time he comes back, whenever he, I don't presume to know when he thinks the right time is. Isn't he gonna be the one that comes back
Well,
the second
uh,
time?
There's a lot to be said in the statement V1. V1 is kind of like something we
Well, he
kind of
is.
made up. I don't know.
He is
Yeah,
the one.
Yeah.
just say it.
You talking about the Messiah?
V-
Are you the
V-
one, or you?
V1, yeah, yeah.
Well,
But I
it's,
mean, our little pea brains. How are we gonna
V1, that's
even imagine
I'm thinking.
what Jehovah,
V1.
what it will look like? Because
Is
he's a
Messiah.
spirit. He's not a form. He's not a man. He's not. When he comes back, when it's got to be a manifestation of
Could be.
his spirit.
But he's here now.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
mean, God
right,
is-
but our
is around
awareness,
us now.
the manifestation
Yeah.
where everybody knows.
True sense of the word.
Everybody
Right.
knows.
He can take physical form, he's done it a couple
well, it's going to
He
be
could be a sheep.
as we work through the text, especially those texts which are
And I'm sorry if I'm,
No,
if I'm making it confusing.
no.
but I
it's-
think about these things.
Well,
It's a confusing subject.
whenever you look at the, let's call them redemptive figures
Yeah.
or redemptive figure in the text, like a lot of people go, look, this is real easy. Ross, just pay attention. There's a seed of David. He's going to be this. Let me show you all the text,
Gonna be a
like I hadn't
branch,
read
he's
these.
gonna be-
And they're going to say,
Yeah.
this is how we know. I mean,
Gonna
you
be a
just clearly
ruler.
just have to read it. And what they do is they've connected the foot bone to the ankle bone bone to the calf bone, and they work your way up, and they go, blah, blah, here it is. Or voila, I should say, not blah, blah, though blah, blah is probably as good. But there's this idea that it's just simple if you just follow it. What we'll find out and what we continue to notice so when we study these things is that this is a very complex situation. Now, along the way, people have focused so much, Jews and Christians, on the Messiah, that and looking forward to this one fixing the world, that meanwhile they don't do anything to do their part. What I want to do as I work through this is say, let's keep the parts straight. What is our job? What are we supposed to be doing? And I think that's it. That's a very, very important part of it.
That's it. I have to keep it simple. This simple walk of Abraham. Just walk after God. Check your heart. Make sure that you're walking in His ways. And if you're not, correct it and trust Him to reveal what needs to be revealed to my pea brain to be able to walk this walk. And do it correctly.
And when I say complex, I don't mean it's we're not able to discern what's being said. We are when we simply read it and study it out. There's some things which are very obvious. There are things that are quite complex. I mean, if anybody really ever studies the Messiah, I think they'll find that within Jewish literature and within the Hebrew Bible, a lot of people have come up with a lot of ideas. What I think is interesting is that that term is never, not one time used to refer to an end times eschatological figure. It's just not. Now, some might say, well, what about Psalm 45 and what about Isaiah 61? Well, read those closely and see if you think that's what it's talking about. But, okay, so if those two, all right, you know, but what I'm getting at is what people have done is they take the complexity of the servant and they take the branch, which there are two words for branch, and they put those and they say, so the servant is the branch and the branch is the servant and this is the Mashiach and this is this, and they lump it all together and they get this big, everything points to this one. What they haven't done is line those texts up side by side and found points of congruity where it does agree, and find things where it indicates this text does not speak of the same as this text. That's what's important to do. But I say that just because there's a lot of people who are focusing on that one thing. It's all they can focus on. That's all they know is making everything fit that one thing, and they miss much about Bible prophecy that way. So anyway, it's important to look at. So JJ is quoting Micah 5. All right, so you know in Micah 5, that's one of the texts that people associate with this coming redemptive ruler. But you, Bethlehem Ephrath, though you be small among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me one who is to be ruler in Israel. His goings forth are from antiquity, from ancient days. He will stand, you know, I mean, you got to know the text, but then you have to break it apart. Who is this one, Matzaotav, who comes forth multiple times? These texts are fascinating. They are such an important part of the eschatological end-time scenario, but they're apart. And, you know, it's like I tell people, for instance, on Yom Kippur, we all keep, to the best of our ability, we try to keep we observe the day, Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a fascinating day. I mean, it's a very holy day, and in Hebrew it's Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonements, and the high priest would go through certain rituals. One involved two goats. One is La'azazel and one is Yehovah. One's for God, one's to be the scapegoat is what we call. And one is led off, the other, and there's this ribbon, and the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies. You know, you got all these ideas. How much of that has to do with John Langberg today? Zilch. No temple, no high priest, no sacrifices, no goats. Well, you could find some goats. You know, if you read through this text, but here's what we can do. Get this, ready? Make yourself low. See, there's always a part that we can do. Now, here's what everybody's focused on. The two goats, the red scarlet ribbon, the thing turns white, they threw the goat off the cliff. The high priest would go in with a chain tied around his leg, so if he said something wrong, he'd die, and they'd drag him out. And everything that has nothing to do with what they need to be doing that day. What I try to do, for me first, because I need a lot of help, is what do I need to be focused on? I'm not a high priest. I don't own goats. What applies to me today? We, religious people, have for many years focused on everybody's job but ours. What's the Messiah going to do? Whether you agree with who he is or not, that's irrelevant. What's he going to do?
He's going to sort it all out.
He's going to sort it all out. I don't have to do anything. This is the view many people have. What I'm trying to do, for me first and anyone else who's interested in, what can we be working on? You know, that's the part we ought to be focused on. I'm going to be as happy and thrilled, hopefully, as everybody when this thing begins to play out. And I go, I had that one wrong. Boy, I really missed that one, Dave. Or we were pretty close on that. But in the meantime,
Who'd have thought?
what do we do? What do we do?
What it was supposed to be doing.
What
That's
can
right.
you?
It's a big part of it.
What we
can
would
you
like
do?
to
That's
do,
what-
what it's
that's
supposed to do.
Yeah.
One question is what you can do. I mean, if you can't do something, like right now, I can't move to the land of Israel, which won't
Yeah.
let me in. I mean, I can go visit.
You can go visit.
Yeah, I
90
do all
days.
that.
What was it the pirate said?
But I
There's
can't
only
get-
two things a man can do, what a man can do and what a man can't do.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean,
But you couldn't make,
folks- yeah, I could.
yeah,
If I wanted to say, oh, I'm moving, what they call it,
Aliyah.
Aliyah.
Nope.
Right to return, I have no right of return.
Oh, they'll give you plenty of right to return.
Give me a right to
Here.
return
That's
back.
right.
Turn you around, take you
Uh-huh.
back. But yeah, so let's focus on what we can do, and hopefully that will change.
Yeah.
Some things will change.
Well, I have biblical texts that say it's going to change,
Sure,
and
sure.
so I think that over time, as we work through the series, and we start looking at these texts, we know basically what the oath is. We know the oath. We know the promise of chosen people in a chosen land. Now, in order to stay in the land, the chosen people have to walk according to a particular way. And if they don't, they're assured through a list of blessings and curses or consequences that if they don't, they won't stay. And so what we have to do is, what I want to get into, where I'm really anxious to get into, are the prophetic text based on what they actually mean in context. Like a lot of people have so developed eschatology according to the Hal Lindsays of the world or according to certain rabbis who have certain opinions. What I want to do is go straight to the text, read the text, look at it in context, and understand what it's saying. Look, I know there are a lot of people out there that say, oh, if you don't have such and such, then there's no way you can understand this. This message was given through and to shepherds, farmers, common folk.
Not hard.
It can't be that hard. And people want to act like it's some mystical mumbo jumbo secret that if you don't, if you
You gotta be on a
can't,
certain level.
you can't transcend into the third heaven, that you can't, or you don't have somebody holding your hand, some sage from a certain century,
Or you aren't filled with the Holy Spirit.
or you weren't born in a certain family. Look, it's gonna be tough for that argument to stand up when we simply work through the text. That's what's so beautiful about this message. Just read the instructions. It says what it says, and it means what it says. Remember, this is the rule that I usually tell people. A lot of people will say, here's what it says, but it means this. Right? That's what a lot of people do. What I like to do is say, here's what it says, and that's what it means. That's what it means. Now, the problem is a lot of people don't read what it says. They're looking for another interpretation. So a lot of times people go, well, that's your interpretation. That's not an interpretation. That's reading the text. I'm not giving you an interpretation. I'm saying to you what it says. So it's important when we seek to find a teacher that we do so by finding someone who doesn't add to or take away from. What does the text say? At least give it a chance. It's like when people talk about, well, Daniel, let me talk to you about Daniel, and they get into all this other stuff, and you're like, as interesting as that is, my sister, it actually says this is what the vision means, like 2 sentences down. Could we maybe start there? Think about it. I mean, people are big into, it says this, but means
I'll
something.
admit, some stuff may be a little difficult. You might have to read it 2 or 3 times just to get an understanding of what you're reading.
Yeah,
But the one thing that impressed me most about all the stuff that's between the covers
Mm-hmm.
is the 10 words. I don't know how you could possibly get another meaning from those. It
Yeah.
was so crystal clear, so straightforward. There's no way to figure out, well, what does this mean? What do you mean, what does it mean? There weren't that many words.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta know what day Saturday is. man.
God was short, to the point, and laid it right out there. Just plain, simple. What was it he instructed Moses to do? Give them the plain truth, the simple truth before they go into the land? Make it plain for them?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I mean, you're talking about the creator that can make something that short, that concise, that to the point, and that's all he had to say.
Mm-hmm. I like in Deuteronomy, it says, and he said nothing else. He added no more. Very clear. Hey, this is fun stuff. Is everybody having fun with all this Bible? Look, we're going to have people who are in different places, who have different opinions. That's fine. That's fine. Don't run off. Don't run off, because you, quite possibly we're all going to learn something from this. I learn every time I open the book because I want to learn every time I open the book. I've changed some of what I believed at certain points in my life because of evidence, and I think it's important that we weigh the evidence and search for what does it really mean.
Consider a matter, yeah.
Yeah, we need to consider it. That's right.
You know what you're gonna teach on next week?
I'm going to teach on the Bible next week, Dave.
Hey, guys, on that one?
Yeah, he knows.
Standard answer. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it's going to be biblical, and we're going to take this further. One of the things that I really want people to understand is that there is a lot of confusion, probably not with this group. This group is pretty well versed, but a lot of people take the terms Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew, and they get all that, and they throw it all in one barrel and shake it up, and it all means the
We're all
same.
practicing here.
Yeah. So we want to explain those groups. We've begun that, but we also want to develop what happened. I mean, why wasn't it just why didn't they just live happily ever after?
That's
You know,
good.
here's the
That's
plan.
good.
So who knows? Maybe
Think of
it's
something James said.
what?
What's the one thing that is wrong with all organizations? They got people.
Yeah. Yeah.
People got in the way.
Yeah.
It'll always get.
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah, man.
I was just going to mention the Sukkot. How many weeks do we have?
Sukkot.
About 8.
I tell you what, it's coming up. We're doing this October the 18th through the 20th. And so if you're planning to join us that weekend, it's a weekend of Sukkot. We're going to do a Sukkot camp meeting here at the UI Center South in St. Francisville. We've got maybe 25 rooms. I don't know how many are left because people are booking them now.
25, and to point out that those rooms at the 2 hotels also include breakfast, so that takes a little cost out of it for you.
Yeah. So and look, if somebody calls and they say, look, they're out of rooms. There's no room in the inn. We do have some stables. No, we have. We have rooms in Baton Rouge. We have rooms in Zachary. These areas are
And
30.
also New Roads, they got a
New
hotel over
Roads.
there.
So if you're having trouble finding a room and you want to join us, which I don't know why you wouldn't want to join us, but if you're having trouble finding a room, just look for one of those towns: Zachary, Baton Rouge, New Roads.
It's actually pretty close.
Yeah, it's actually right
And-
across the river.
And if you could just briefly, I hope that there's not any misunderstanding about what this Sukkot camp meeting is. Like, it's not your traditional camp out in a tent for the whole period.
Some may want to do,
And some-
yeah,
but
we're doing a
that's not what
weekend
this is.
conference. No, we're doing a
Yeah.
weekend conference, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And look, there's some people who say, well, I don't want to do that. I want to go to Alaska and do 7 days with the assemblies of Yahweh. Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
This is a weekend conference. It's what we put together. We have done one of these, we've done several of these, Sukkot, where people come in and in fact, we've told the story in 2009. One of our camp out turned into Woodstock almost. It was it rained and we trashed the place unintentionally.
Yeah, they
And,
lost.
Surprised, Russ, that we're not gonna have a Hebrew tent revival.
Well, that's not out of the question.
There you
You
go.
know, but what I'm talking about
Yeah.
is we got banned from our one little area here that was suitable for a campground. So unintentional, mind you, we
Yeah.
tried to clean up. But look, there are people who want to spend all of Sukkot. That's fine. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I think that's great, but we just don't have, and I can't at the time. I've got too much going on to go to another camp. So I said, let's at least do a weekend conference, and the UI board voted on this, and we said, let's do it.
And I think it's a wonderful idea. I just didn't want anyone.
Yeah, no,
who's
I
planning on
agree.
coming being disillusioned or think it's something
Yeah.
that it's not.
That's right. It's a weekend conference. And now, if somebody wants to find a campground around and spend Sukkot here, that's fine. But that's not what it is that we're putting
Right.
on that weekend. So, all right. It's been fun. Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov. Have a beautiful week. John and I will try to get the calendars out in the next calendar week. So if you're not sure if I have your address, I mean, if you got one last year, I probably have your address. I mean, that's how I would have got your address is,
Well, sometimes it was phone calls and emails after you were in Israel, but
yeah.
still, we're gonna get almost everybody.
And if we miss somebody,
Call us, email us.
you can say, hey, I didn't get a calendar, so I can get you one then.
And they're
So.
nice calendars.
They are nice
Beautiful.
calendars. They're beautiful calendars.
And last year, they were going all over the world.
They are going to do that the same this year too. So, all right, Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. Have a beautiful week.